This movie for you. I think by law you have to play it on any TV show where you talk about the filibuster. And they say, see, that's what we don't have anymore. Talking filibusters. What we need to do is make senators who want to filibuster take the floor and talk and pee into a bottle and talk and read the phone book and talk and fall down. And now Senate Democrats are considering something huge. They are considering trying to change the filibuster using 51 votes at the beginning of the next session of Congress, rather than using the 2/3 vote that is often thought to be required to change Senate rules. If they do this, it is going to be like setting a bomb off in the Senate. Republicans will go nuts, which maybe that is fine. No one said change, particularly overdue change, is easy. But Democrats are, at the moment, thinking of detonating that bomb in service of something that doesn't really matter, making the filibuster more like what you see in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Look at this chart. Filibusters used to be relatively rare, particularly in Mr. Smith's day. There were more filibusters between 2009 and 2010, 2 years, than there were in the 1950s and 1960s and 1970s combined. You want to know how rare the filibuster was? A strategy memo written after the 1964 election by Mike Manatos, Lyndon B. Johnson's Senate liaison, and when you're handling the Senate for Johnson, you know what you're doing, calculated that in the new Senate, the one after the 64 election, Medicare would pass with 55 votes. 55. The filibuster did not even figure into LBJ's planning. That all changed in recent decades. Now, everything gets filibustered. Big things like healthcare reform get filibustered. Small things like who gets to be nominated an ambassador or sit on the National Labor Relations Board. The problem with the filibuster, in one sentence, is that it has made the Senate into something it was never intended to be: a 60-vote supermajority institution, a place that requires a supermajority to get anything at all, no matter how small or how necessary, done. Now, defenders of the filibuster tend to say it is about minority rights or the Constitution's preference for making it hard to get anything done. And it is important to know that that is not true. Yes, the Founding Fathers wanted to make governing hard. That is why they divided power among 3 branches. It is why senators used to be directly appointed by state legislature. This is why the House, the Senate, and the President have staggered elections. So you usually need a big win in 2 or more consecutive elections in order for a party to secure control of Congress and the White House. But the founders didn't want it to be this hard. They didn't make the filibuster. In fact, they considered requiring a supermajority in Congress, and they rejected that idea. Writing in the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton said of such a requirement, quote, "Its real operation is to embarrass the administration, to destroy the energy of government, and to substitute the pleasure, caprice, or artifice of an insignificant, turbulent, or corrupt junta to the regular deliberations and decisions of a respectable majority." Kind of know how to wield a pen. But if any of that sound familiar, kind of like what we've been seeing in recent years, maybe? The founders, by the way, they also opposed political parties. They didn't want them. And so they couldn't have foreseen how highly disciplined parties would subvert and remake the political system they designed and use rules like the filibuster, which didn't even exist back then, to, well, what is their line? Destroy the energy of government and substitute the pleasure, caprice, or artifice of an insignificant, turbulent, or corrupt junta to the regular deliberations and decisions of a respectable majority. I love Alexander Hamilton. Forcing senators to talk when the filibuster doesn't do anything about that problem. And that means it doesn't do anything about the central problem that keeps real majorities from governing today. We can't have a political system in which, even when the American people vote twice in a row to give one party the power to pursue its agenda, the minority is still able to make them fail. That is a system in which democratic accountability, not to mention the ability to govern effectively, breaks down. That is a system in which voters think they gave power to somebody to make the country better, to enact an agenda, and then when that party, be it Republican or Democrat, isn't able to get the job done, they think that party has failed them, and they become that much more disillusioned, even though it was minority obstruction that kept bills from passing. Look, I would like to see both parties end the filibuster cooperatively. And now would be a good time to do it, because we have divided government. So it won't mean one party or the other suddenly gets to ram their whole agenda through all at once. But the first step towards having a reasonable reform of the filibuster, no matter how it comes about, no matter what rules you use, is recognizing what the actual problem is. And the problem is not that senators don't get enough time to talk. It is that they get too much power to obstruct. Joining me now are two of the finest congressional scholars alive today. Thomas Mann, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, and Norm Ornstein, Resident Scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. They are also the co-authors of the great book, It Is Even Worse Than It Looks, How the American Constitutional System Collided with the New Politics of Extremism. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me here the day before Thanksgiving.
Always a pleasure.
Delighted.
Tom, how did that graph happen? How did we get here to where the filibuster is a constant of political life?
It started changing actually earlier in the late 50s, early 60s, as business picked up and there was much to be done, and the Senate didn't have the luxury of sitting back and enjoying a single senator or group of senators trying to filibuster. So they set up a two-track system and so on. But it's escalated dramatically in recent years. Basically, the minority has decided that it is the route to making the president of the other party a failure, either by defeating outright or by slowing down or by discrediting anything he tries to do. So it's the routinization of the filibuster. Norms no longer operate to restrain the behavior. You know, in the late 60s, maybe 10% of all serious legislation was subject to some kind of filibuster-related delay. Now it's 90%, 95%.
Yeah, it's constant. And Norm, so then explain this to me, because you would have a better sense of it. And I don't know actually your position on this. Maybe you agree with it. What is the appeal of the talking filibuster? What problem are we fixing?
You know, I'm very happy to try and move the pressure onto the minority. And a talking filibuster might make a difference in a handful of cases. The problem, though, is the one that the chart points out and that Tom emphasized. And it is twofold. The first is it's no longer an isolated individual, a Mr. Smith. It's a party strategy, and if you've got 40 people or more who are willing to talk, and all you got to do is stay on for 5 minutes and then hand it off to somebody else, this doesn't solve the problem. But it's also that it has been used on everything now. The rule hasn't changed since 1975. It's the practice in the last few years. So there are ways to deal with it more effectively. The big problem now with filibusters in blocking them is it takes the majority. The onus is on the majority to provide 60 votes. What I'd like to do is say, never mind the talking, you got to constantly come up with 41 votes.
You being the minority.
The minority. So remember, we had this absurd situation where they had to drag 92-year-old Robert Byrd out of his hospital bed to come to the floor to provide that 60th vote. Make them do it, but you've also got to do more. You've got to make sure that these routine uses of the filibuster can't be applied and take up so much time. You know, the way a filibuster now works, if you apply to something that passes unanimously, and it ultimately does, and you've used a bunch of time, you get 30 hours where you don't even have to go on the floor, soaking up more floor time. Cut that out.
And so just trying to end a filibuster just takes, it takes hours and hours and hours. But that brings me to one other thing that's changed here, which is that now Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid says he wants to do something about the filibuster. Isn't exactly what I want to do. But that feels to me, Tom, like a tectonic shift to have the Majority Leader say, we need to change this. It has gone too far.
It really is. Harry Reid has long defended the prerogatives of the Senate and of the filibuster, even in the face of criticism from his own members. But virtually all of his members now want to do something, and he's been infuriated by the way in which Mitch McConnell has carried on. But if you think about it, it's a very odd time to do this. The House is under the control
you don't get that much out
of the Republicans, so it's not as if the filibuster is the only thing standing in the way of the Democratic program. And as Norm said, at the beginning of this new Congress, President Obama has a better shot at working with the Senate, including 6, 8, 10 Republicans, and using that to put pressure on the House. So is this the right time to blow up the Senate?
Norm, real quick, you seem to do you think we need 67 or 51? Whatever you want to do. What do you think is the number of senators you need to change the rule?
Constitutionally, you could do it with 51, but you made the key point. In 1975, when they changed the rule, they started to do it this way. Then they stepped back and reached a bipartisan compromise. If you're going to jam something through, and there are a million other ways that senators can bollocks up the works, then you better do it with something that's really sweeping. If you do a half or a third of the way measure and inflame the entire Senate, you're probably not doing it the right way.
Norm Ornstein and Tom Mann, thank you both for being here this evening. I really appreciate it.